Hello, listeners. Welcome back to Dark Dark World. Today, it's Doc World, and we're going to be covering the Netflix docuseries Bad Vegan, 2022 release. Pretty current stuff. And I'm very excited to bring onto the podcast as a very special guest, for the very first time, surprisingly, my father, Professor Jack Crittenden. Jack, how are you?
I'm well, Jordan. Thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. I think this will be a fun one to break down with you. What am I going to call you throughout this? You're a man of many names. The Professor, Cactus, Cactus Jack, William Jackson, W. Jackson. Maybe I'll refer to you as all of the above. Dad, Da. Any preference?
I have no preference. You refer to me any way you choose, any way you please, any way that you think is appropriate.
All right, sir.
And I'll call you Jordan.
So this one, Dad, is a wacky one, Bad Vegan. There's a lot to get into, of course, but first of all, the title, Bad Vegan. When I came into this, even before I really knew what it was, people had written in saying, oh, are you going to do a Doc World on Bad Vegan? Because I'm vegan. And so people know this about me, and they thought, oh, Bad Vegan. Because I think the perception was, here's going to be, it's billed as true crime, and it's called Bad Vegan. It's going to be about vegan swindling or some sort of criminal vegan, which technically it is, but boy, is that sort of misleading.
Well, yes, I think it's completely misleading. In fact, she's a good vegan. I don't know why it's called Bad Vegan. I don't know. Is there a large vegan community and this would lure them into watching? In other words, there would be an audience for true crime and swindling that would lure regular viewers. But somehow this title would capture more of an audience? Is that the thought?
I think it must be, because it sort of, for me, gets explained towards the end of the series when, try not to get into any spoilers just out of the gate. Well, first of all, if you haven't watched this, I know I always say this for the Doc Worlds, but do go and watch this one. I think it'll make this conversation much more entertaining for you. And this isn't quite one of those stories that's easy to break down for you in a linear way, like I've done with some of the other ones. So I really do recommend watching it. It's good, it's wacky, it's wild, and it is worth your time. It's a 4-parter. It's not a lot to get through. So yeah, there will be spoilers now. I think the title somewhat, the reasoning for the title comes into play a little bit at the end when, because of the way that Sarma and Anthony are apprehended through this sort of silly pizza thing, all of the headlines and the reporting of this is vegan woman busted by ordering a pizza. And now the big vegan, her downfall was pizza. She's not a real vegan. This was, and that was so small in the story. That aspect of it really had nothing to do with a pizza. Right, but that was getting all the traction in the headlines. And that's because there is, I don't know if it's a community, but there are a lot of people out there who don't like vegans. They feel that vegans are very holier than thou and look down upon the rest of society for not being as pure. There's a lot of that. So people find vegans annoying.
Yeah, I find vegans annoying, and I'm pretty much a vegan.
Yeah, that's true. They are. And yes, there are a lot of annoying vegans. And so it's easy to play on, the same way that the headlines were using the pizza. Even though this documentary dives into the story completely and sort of should know better almost, it's doing the same thing. Ooh, Bad Vegan. This will get people, oh, finally I have something to shame vegans with. Oh, you're all like this criminal. You know?
Well, there's a scene, very brief, after the apprehension, where one of the police officers said, yeah, there was a pizza ordered from Domino's, And again, part of the strangeness is that Anthony and Sarma always seem to have separate rooms.
Right.
But the slob Anthony was eating the pizza and the wings, and the police officer says, I don't think Sarma had any of it.
Right.
Which goes with her character, because then once she's in prison, she's trying to convince inmates and guards to be vegan.
Right.
So but I completely agree with you. The headlines were, vegan restaurateur eats pizza and is caught, or whatever the hell it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're playing that up. But it not only does it have little to do with the story, it's misleading. It's a bad title.
Yeah. Not Bad Vegan. Bad title.
Bad title should be the title of the Bad Vegan.
Yeah. So do you agree with me that this is good? Bad title, good docuseries is how I feel about it.
Well, there were... I don't know enough about documentaries, so I would defer to you on this, but it seemed to me that the two major questions I have, I place at the feet of the documentarian. I think it's their fault that they didn't answer the questions I have, which are obvious questions. The first one you alluded to, which is that Sarma, the owner of New York City's finest and maybe the world's finest vegan restaurant,
Pure Food and Wine, it was called.
Pure Food and Wine, has a connection with Alec Baldwin, who's a frequent patron and apparently has some kind of crush on Sarma, and is the conduit to Shane Fox / Anthony Strange's. But it's never explored how Shane Fox knows Alec Baldwin. Now, if they had said, we tried to contact Alec Baldwin, he refused an interview, Sarma refused to talk about the connection, okay, but there's nothing talked about there. So I'm saying, how is this major celebrity in contact with this guy? What's their connection? He's sending him little cartoons and stupid quips through Twitter or whatever the device was.
Yeah, I had wondered about that also. There are a couple of moments like that where I think there were some misses by the documentarians. Another one we'll come to soon, but it's the same kind of thing. But yeah, I was sort of left with the impression that Shane had maybe run into Alec at the restaurant once or somewhere and had a brief exchange, and then hit him up on Twitter and would constantly reply to his comments until he became sort of recognizable to Alec. And, oh, it's this guy again. And then they had a little bit of banter, and that was kind of it.
But if that's the case, why would Shane need Alec Baldwin? If he's already in the restaurant, why not just become a frequent patron the way Alec Baldwin did, get to know Sarma, and just work his way in that way? Anyway, but I raised that only because you said, is it a good documentary? And well, it certainly kept my attention. So I think on one level, it's a sign that it's good. I don't remember how I got into it. I don't remember if you suggested it to me or whether I had been caught up in this, what now appears to be an almost frequent theme of swindling and fraud, which I have enjoyed. What's the one about the Romeo guy? The Tinder swindler.
Yeah.
The Tinder
I haven't
swindler.
seen that one.
That one, the story of Elizabeth Holmes.
Right.
And her fraudulent behavior with Theranos. So I don't remember how I got into it. But once I started, and again, I'm not a frequent viewer of documentaries on true crime, but once I started, it's so wacky that even that on its own is entertaining and worth watching.
Yeah,
for the
story,
wackiness.
The story is compelling.
Yeah.
So you agree with me that this is worth watching for people. There may be some missed opportunities or dropped balls at points. But what was your second question? You said you were left with, or should we not get to it yet?
We can. Two big ones, and there's a little one which we can get to later. But the other big one comes later on in this series when Sarma, having now gone through, having had the restaurant closed, having been picketed by her employees for failure to pay their wages, having had the restaurant closed, having failed to pay her backers. I don't think she's on the lam. You'll have to tell me where this happens in the series, because I'm not that familiar with it at this point. She somehow raises, is it $380,000? Or is it 800 and some?
860,000.
860,000 after all of this failure. Well, that isn't gone into. How? What's her approach? With whom? How? How does she do that?
They say a couple of times it's remarkable that the speed with which she was able to do it, it was unprecedented. And then I guess you're just sort of to assume that she had enough good faith built up, enough credit in the bank, as it were, to draw upon friends or people that trusted her enough. I guess.
Who at this stage? First, you can't imagine an institution.
Right.
No institution giving her money. Unless she's going to Deutsche Bank, and maybe because they seem to be fraudulent themselves. But who is going to be willing to sink money into, it's not even into the restaurant, which is closed at this point, into her.
Right, into her to then use. Yeah, there are a few things like that. I guess let's get into it, because I know, listeners, there are some of you who just aren't going to watch it anyway. You've told me that, yeah, I know I should watch it, but I just like hearing you talk about it anyway. So fine, we'll give you a little bit of the play-by-play. You've heard us talking about Sarma already. She is the quote-unquote bad vegan here. And as my father has mentioned, she's actually a good vegan. Sarma Melingalis, that's a Latvian name. I looked that up. I said, what? Because, her father speaks with an accent. He's interviewed in this. And I just thought, well, they're clearly from somewhere else initially, and it's Latvia. So yeah, Latvian-American restaurateur. She started off, she worked on Wall Street. She majored at university, she majored in economics and realized early on that wasn't her path, and food was her passion. So she started a restaurant with her boyfriend. She meets this celebrity chef, Matthew Kenny, who was already sort of a big deal in New York, fine dining chef. And they fall in love and they start a relationship, and then they open this restaurant. And this sort of becomes a theme for Sarma is, I don't want to be too judgmental really, but it almost seems like she's incapable of having a serious relationship with a male if it's not romantic as well. She ends up dating someone every time she meets these guys. Even Alec Baldwin becomes a potential interest. She and Matthew will break up, later on down the road. And then while she's mourning him, she gets into another relationship and then breaks up with that guy. And this is before our grifter even comes in. So, maybe I'm making too much of it, but it seems to be a theme. So, oh, you meet this chef, you're talking about a restaurant, and then you end up in a relationship together. Oh, of course you do. So he's the chef, she sort of runs the business end of it, and they come up with this, at the time, this is like early 2000s, a pretty cutting-edge restaurant. And not only is it an all-vegan restaurant, but it's all raw. Just
to interrupt for a moment, I don't remember, is Matthew isn't vegan.
Right.
Is Sarma at that point vegan?
I think she is. Yeah.
Okay, so the connection then is that she's vegan and Matthew is a top chef, and she kind of says, look, why don't we start this vegan restaurant? That's kind of the angle.
Yeah, there's none of this here. We could do it all raw. And then he thought that would be an interesting challenge. How can I make exciting dishes, but these are the parameters I have to work in? And not only is it vegan, but it's raw vegan. And yet I'm making fine dining. There just wasn't that. There wasn't a vegan fine dining experience. And it's a hit. It gets backing from the main investor, who's sort of becomes a thread in the story is Jeffrey Chodorow. He gives her the initial investment and, puts a few million into the restaurant. And it seems like a great idea because it's drawing celebrities and it's got star power and it's sexy, and Gwyneth Paltrow's writing about it in her blog, and it takes off. It's a big hit. So it unravels a little bit because their romantic relationship unravels, Sarma's and Matthew's. And they both independently contact this Jeffrey and say, look, I've broken up with Matthew. I can't work with him anymore. Look, I've broken up with Sarma. I can't work with her anymore. And so he's sort of forced to choose one of them to go forward with, and he picks Sarma, much to Matthew's chagrin. And then Matthew's gone from our story. He's broken up with Sarma. He's not part of the restaurant anymore. So yeah, that's Sarma. She's... Let's talk a little bit about your impressions of Sarma before anything happens. So I just mean she's a talking head through this. Most of the documentary is various talking heads, and she's omnipresent. How does she seem to you? What are your impressions of Sarma just as a person, if you can separate what you know she is going to happen to her?
By the time the documentary is being made, she's out of prison, right?
Right.
Okay, and I think they're making it, at least in part, while she's in prison.
She had done some of her own, before she goes into Rikers, she does her own little documentary, which, not to be released or anything, but just had someone interview her and get all of her story on film because she thought something like this might come down the road. And she was right, but then they don't end up really using any of that except one little bit. So when they use that footage, technically, yes, they were filming it while she was there.
So I raised that because I find her distant, emotionally distant, and maybe even emotionally unavailable. And so I don't know, first, how much time has passed and how raw, ironically, all this is for her emotionally. But she just seems almost detached from it.
Yeah.
And you then begin to wonder if she is, in many ways, emotionally unavailable. Because her relationship with Anthony, with Shane/Anthony, is odd, even when they, as we'll discuss later, get married. Her relationship with her family seems strained, although they seem in contact. There doesn't seem to be a lot of emotional bonding there. The only living creature she seems bonded with is her dog, Leon.
Leon, yeah.
But at the same time, okay, that's one side. And I don't remember, you'll have to remind me, she, as a child and as a young adult, is kind of withdrawn, right? She is a loner a little bit.
Yeah, she's a little different, weird haircuts and a bit of a loner, not a lot of friends.
Yeah, she's a strange amalgam of parts. On one hand, I was going to say she's weak-willed, but she isn't really. She keeps a diary or a journal.
Yeah, impressively so.
Yeah, but it seems to lack insight.
Yeah.
She doesn't seem to be clued in at all of what's going on inside of her based on in relation to what's happening outside of her.
Yeah.
That's completely odd to me. And as I say, the emotional distance, she doesn't appear to be interested in emotionally bonding. Now, on the good side, she has trouble with small talk. She's very uncomfortable in the restaurant scene when she has to be schmoozing with customers and maybe even investors. And yet the photographs you see of her are these glam shots where she's on the cover of magazines and she's in the bar and she's got a martini in her hand and she seems very relaxed.
She's good at playing the role even though she's not interested in it. She's not comfortable with it. I feel the same way, and it's a shame that we don't get to see what she's like before all this, and the same with the family. She does seem completely distant and even cold i- through a lot of it, and the family do seem hurt, and they probably are. But yeah, we don't really get a glimpse of what it was like. We see photos and things, but it would be interesting to see. She doesn't seem like a fun person, but you have these testimonials from all the people when the days were good, when the restaurant was thriving. They loved her. They
Yeah,
called her Sarmama. She took care of
yeah.
everybody. They loved her coming in. So she must have been. This must have really done a number on her, and you can imagine why. But yeah, I got that. There was one moment, and it's I think in the last episode where she's talking about, I think his name was Jim, a former employee that she fired for some sort of unfair reason. He got a little testy with her in an email that people weren't getting paid, and I think he worded it, I was a little more aggressive than I should have been, and she responded by firing him. And she talks about how she ran into him about a year later on the street, and they hugged, and she sort of apologized, and she gets emotional in the talking head segment telling us about this. She gets a tear comes down her eye, and her voice breaks, and you go, okay, so there's an emotional being in here.
Yeah.
There was that, so that was huge for me.
That's the guy who looks like a bouncer. Right. Bald-headed guy.
Bald guy, yeah.
Yes, I would not describe her as cold-hearted.
Not cold-hearted, just cold, a little cold.
Yeah, but then there's this other, I don't want to call it a creepy element, but I found it bewildering because I'm not, again, quite sure of the relationship. And that's with the seemingly homeless man she befriends. So she doesn't seem to be guarded in any way, because otherwise I don't think this Anthony/Shane would have been able to penetrate. So she's not guarded. She seems very open and very friendly. So she befriends this homeless man, mostly through Leon, the dog.
Right.
But then
because she'll go on walks with him, and this man started talking to her because of the dog. Yeah.
Yeah, but doesn't he then come into the restaurant? I'm never clear on his relationship with her, because at one point, when the family fears that, I guess it's actually, has she been arrested, and they're worried about the dog. This guy, street guy's worried about the dog. He calls the father.
Right. So he was in.
Yeah, so he's talking to the family. Then he says, well, I'm going down there. There aren't enough police agents in the state of Florida, or wherever the hell they are, to stop me from getting to Leon. I'm like, what? He gets in a car and he's driving down there, and the father calls and says, no, we got the dog. He's fine. So he turns around. Well, okay, here's a homeless guy who's befriended her. She's befriended him. He's coming to the restaurant. He knows the family. I have no idea who he is.
At one point, he says, "What would you have done differently?" He says, "Well, I would have killed Anthony. I would have dumped him in the river." But it is an odd relationship, and then you think, well, why didn't she give him a job? Why,
exactly.
Or maybe he didn't want one, or I don't know.
Yeah,
he stayed in her
on the
apartment
street
for a while, I think. But you're right; it's a glimpse of she has some compassion.
And the other guy, Naz,
right?
Naz, who's another guy who.
This is the Russian guy that she meets through Shane, who's also sort of being grifted.
He's also being grifted, but also seems like a grifter. So everybody in the restaurant is concerned about him because he seems so shady.
Right.
And yet in the documentary, he's coming across as being constantly looking out for Sarma. Well, I don't know. Is that true? Or is he just trying to present himself that way?
Right. It's hard to tell with these guys.
Yeah, so there are these characters in her life, and I still don't know what emotionally she is seeing in them or how she's attached to them. Or they're just kind of figures who come in and out of her life and they don't really mean anything. I don't know.
That's fair. It's unclear.
It's part of the absence of emotional depth. And I don't mean to be unfair to Sarma. I just didn't get it in the documentary. And I don't know if it was made that way to have her come across as being cold and distant and emotionally unavailable.
And it's hard to tell, as you say, without knowing how much she's been impacted. Her personality has been impacted by all of these events. So, we'll briefly touch on how Shane enters the picture, and it is through Alec Baldwin because Sarma breaks up with Matthew. He's no longer in the picture. Alec Baldwin is a regular at Pure. He comes in all the time. They become friendly. It seems like he has a crush on Sarma, and she's not quite interested, but thinking about it almost. She mentions, and she's, as I mentioned, always getting into relationships. She's in another one, so she's not available. But she says that when Alec Baldwin meets the woman that he goes on to be with, it felt like she missed the boat. It was a missed opportunity. Oh, I was thinking I should have dated him, but thought I was too young for him, and he ends up being with someone who's even younger. So she was sort of lamenting that fact. Okay, well, this is just weird. So she ends up breaking up with the guy that she was with at this time, after Matthew, during Alec Baldwin. This is a hard breakup for her, apparently, and she's a bit depressed. And she ends up adopting this dog that she originally intended for Alec Baldwin to get because he was feeling lonely. He didn't want it. She ended up adopting the dog and fell madly in love with the dog, Leon. So this is her relationship with Alec Baldwin. And then he, as you say, we don't really know how, but knows this Shane Fox, who Sarma thinks has a valid connection with Alec Baldwin because she sees them interacting on Twitter. She can see it there. It's not like he's only messaging Alec and Alec never responds or anything. So she can see their friends and thinks, okay, well, if Alec vouches for this guy, he must be cool. And he is cool. Shane Fox. Boy, this guy. So we're introduced to Shane Fox the same way, presumably, Sarma is introduced to Shane Fox as this sort of mysterious, very flashy, big money, important dude who's got drivers and chauffeurs taking him around. He's wearing Rolexes. He splashes a lot of cash. And actually, I should back up. She hasn't met him in person. It's all online through the Twitter stuff and then emails with Alec. And then she starts talking to him, this Shane Fox, playing Words with Friends. This game was popular at the time. And so it was almost like they were using that as a dating app, just having chats with each other, playing the game. And he had a lot of he was very handsome in his photos that he presented on his social media. Good looking guy, looks pretty cool. And then when he finally meets her in person, he's a little bit fat, kind of frumpy, little same guy from the photos, but he's put on a few pounds. He's not quite as impressive looking. And Sarma thinks, well, I shouldn't be shallow about that. We have a connection. So he's a little fatter than I thought, but I'll get him on a vegan diet. He'll be good. But yeah, it's key that he comes across as important and wealthy. That's crucial, right? He wants her to see him in this way. And he goes out of his way to almost over the top gestures. Like, we're going to Tiffany's, and has this driver pick them up and take them to Tiffany's. And I want you to look around. They take them to the exclusive floor of Tiffany's, and they sort of roll out the red carpet for him. And he tells Sarma, just pick out some things that you want, whatever you want. Of course, they don't end up buying anything, but they're just being sort of entertained by the staff. And he's putting on a show, right? But it makes you think, well, okay, a lot of this must be legit. He obviously can afford a Rolex. He is able to pay drivers, presumably. So it's hard to doubt that the guy has money, right?
The guy has money, appears to have money.
Right.
And then there's the other side of Shane you haven't mentioned yet, which is his mysterious occupation, which appears to have something to do with some kind of black ops. At one point, I think it's Sarma says to him, you mean sort of like Blackwater, private security. He goes, yeah, sort of like that. But he It's alleged that he's going off to various places around the world where he is troubleshooting for the government, and is unavailable, can't be contacted, is out of communication, and on a couple of occasions may need some resources from her to finish off the job that he might be doing.
Right. Which is so odd.
Which is, yeah, completely odd. So you've got this kind of shady, mysterious background and some obviously flashy money.
And the mysterious background, the shady occupation, this is common, I guess, for grifter types, for these charlatans, is using the, oh, I'm ex-military, I work off the grid, I'm kind of Jason Bourne from the Bourne Identity. It's best that you don't know about what I do, right? Because then you can't really disprove it. I think the Vanity Fair journalist from the documentary says, like, yeah, you can see if someone's been in the military. That's pretty easy to look up, but there's no record of who the Secret Service is, or you can't just look up and see who black ops operators are, right? So it's hard to disprove.
Yeah, it's a good cover.
Right. And it's...
Do you want to get into the family?
Oh, yeah. Because, and this is a good leaping off point for it, because it's interesting that Shane, apparently everyone he meets, he has similar stories that he tells, but they're a little different. But he's often saying that he's a Navy SEAL, an ex-Navy SEAL. This is a common thing for grifters. They take it a little further than it needs to go. You probably could have just said you were ex-military, but no, you have to be the upper echelon. And he's sort of lucky that he doesn't get, say that to the wrong people, because there are a lot of guys out there who make it their mission to shame sort of false Navy SEALs, stolen valor, they call it. They've got YouTubers who are out there trying to expose these men because it's that common. So he's obviously very cautious about who he tells things to. And what's also unclear from the documentary is how many people he has working with him on the long con, right? It's good that this documentary is a series and not just a one-off, because they're able, over the course of the 4 episodes, to show us that Sarma goes along with him gradually over a long sort of period of time. It's not like, a week after meeting, he starts getting money from her. It's quick, but it takes time, and he embeds himself, and he uses his flashiness and mysterious life to sort of lure her in. But then he's very kind and warm, and the dog seems to like him. So he has that going for him. He does have some charisma and charm, something likable.
Yeah, Leon, the dog, is the connection. He seems very affectionate and caring about the dog, which endears him to Sarma. But as one of the restaurant employees pointed out, the two of them were never affectionate. They never held hands. When they came into the restaurant, they didn't seem to be in love. There was none of that. So my impression was that really the only connection is Leon the dog. I don't really understand what their connection is.
Yeah, she says that she loves them. She was so in love, but you're right. There's no one else sees that.
Right, and people are surprised.
Yeah, they don't. They're like, are they romantically interested, or is this just a new
they
business
don't seem
thing?
to fit.
It's odd, and she even describes at one point that they never really were sexual. They didn't really have sex. There were a couple of awful experiences that he subjected her to, but it wasn't a common thing, and they ended up staying in separate rooms for much of the time. So you're right, there's never really any romance, and yet she describes it as being so in love with him that it was hard to see any red flags. But I think a lot of that is down to Leon, who, and this will get into the family, Shane convinces Sarma that he can get Leon to live forever. Shane convinces Sarma that he can get Leon to live forever, that he will be immortal, and that this world is a charade, that there is this other dimension that he has access to, that he can bring her into as long as she trusts him and passes all these tests, that then the family, quotes around the family, almost like Manson, the family, will embrace her and they'll live happily ever after with all of the riches and treasures in the world, and they'll be immortal. And you're laughing because it sounds so ridiculous.
Yes, there isn't anything that you can grab onto as a hook into this reality of theirs and say, oh, I see.
Right.
I see. Because at one point, Shane is putting on even more weight. And somehow I think he blames Sarma, right? He said, this is your fault. I have to do this.
Well, yeah.
Because of you.
This is the depth of his... He's so good at manipulating and gaslighting that he's able to... He's growing towards 300 pounds. He's getting really heavy. And he's telling her that this is a test. She has to see him and be repulsed by his physical appearance and show that she still loves him through that in order to pass the test. And then once they enter this, utopia, his weight will magically disappear and he'll be sexy Shane again.
Right.
It's just mindless.
And it's mind-boggling to me. There is a moment where she's describing the house where the family lives, I guess, in this dimension. But to enter the house, you have to drop your physical form. Isn't there some kind of transformation of your physical form?
Yeah. You can't be the tiny blonde human anymore,
Right.
what she calls her. You become one of them. And so they're somewhere between aliens and angels, I guess, is the idea I'm picking up on. This is another thing that at one point in the documentary, that same Vanity Fair journalist says, because she's in the vegan world, and this is a little unfair because most vegans are not like this, but he implies that because she's in this world, she's already sort of hip to some of this stuff like crystals and psychics and spirituality and sort of otherworldly stuff. She wants to believe in that stuff anyway, and here's a guy encouraging it, right? Maybe. We don't really know what kind of a vegan she was.
Yeah.
To me, she was clearly smart, educated, did Wall Street, doing the restaurant thing. She's business savvy. So she's not some bimbo who's easily manipulated, and yet she is easily manipulated.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. Where do you see the entry point for him? Is it her loneliness, just a fundamental loneliness? What is it about this guy that allows him not simply to enter her life, but to take over her life? He's going into the restaurant at one point. The people in the restaurant don't really know what his connection is to the business. And he's coming in and he's asking for files.
Right.
Employee files, which he takes away, and they don't know whatever happens to them.
Right.
Where do you see this happening in her?
Well, it's a combination of things because, as I mentioned, it seems like she's the type that always needs to be with someone romantically. And so her relationship, if one ends, it's not long before she's in a new one. I've known people like this. Maybe you do as well. So that seems to be in play. She had just come out of the breakup. She gets the dog. That's helping a little bit, but she needs a partner. That's always what she seems to be after. So he was the next guy up, perfect opportunity, but also he's practiced at this. Clearly, we'll find out later that he's done this to a few other women, in particular his ex-wife, but never to this level. That's another thing. This was a huge escalation for him and his con. Going to this level, the amounts of money that we're going to get into here. But I don't know. It has to be a perfect storm of loneliness, gullibility, charm on his end, saying the right things at the right time.
Well, they have those I don't know when she begins recording the phone conversations with him. And at one point, I think it's Naz, this bartender slash fellow grifter slash gullible guy, who suggests to her that she should record the conversations with Anthony or Shane, which she does. But you listen to what he's saying, and it's just stupid drivel and threats and demands. And you're thinking there isn't any charm there.
No, certainly not at that point, no.
Yeah, it's awful. But I don't know I haven't seen anything from him that's charming other than taking her to Tiffany's, having champagne, and looking at jewelry.
Yeah, and we have to take her word and his ex-wife's word that there's something about him that makes you fall in love.
Well, that's what I was going to say about the ex-wife. At least there you see they have a loving relationship. They have a child together.
Right.
They're married. They seem to be they're photographs of them, of the family, of him with the child. There seems to be some emotional connection there. With Sarma, I don't see any connection, any emotional connection, other than this dream that you can become immortal and rich, have all of your dreams come true, and then he falls into this cliched line. You told me you wanted happy forever, whatever that catchphrase is they use, the forever after, or whatever
Happily
he calls
after,
it.
Yeah.
And I said, really? Is she even happy in this relationship with this guy? I don't see any moments of happiness with her.
No, like there are some photos early on that we see where she's smiling with him, but they're few and far between, and we just don't have anything to go on. Even early on, though, she's skeptical a couple of times. She's not, as we've said, she's intelligent enough to be like, well, this doesn't feel right for a couple of the things. He starts asking her to wire money. This is so strange. So they're in this relationship, but he's not really around very much. He doesn't live in New York where she lives. So he sort of comes and goes, but most of the time he's not with her, and their relationship is through the phone. And she doesn't know where he is. He says, oh, I'm, on a black ops mission, or, oh, I'm visiting my father, or whatever it is. But he's not with her, and he could be anywhere. Of course, we'll come to find out he's usually at a casino, but he doesn't say that. But he starts asking her, I would love for them to have asked her, okay, the first time he asked you for money, take us through that, because I would like to know when it first happened. But eventually he just starts asking her to wire him large sums of money, and she does it. So it's 20,000 here, 40,000 here, sometimes 100,000, and these random wire transfers that happen, first every month, then every couple of weeks, then sometimes even every few days. And if she shows frustration with it, he says, come on, we're almost there. You gotta pass the tests. I want you to live forever. We need to be together forever and enter the family. And my brother is going to kill me. This is another thing. He has this mysterious brother who doesn't exist, that's following him and is sort of like a nemesis to the family.
Well, he's a demon.
He's a demon.
He's a demon. Because doesn't the ex-wife say something to him like, well, if this demon is following you, why aren't you dead?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. He said that they'd been following him his whole life, this army of demons, and his brother is one. His father, real life, the father does exist, also seemed to be in on some of the scams. He and Shane robbed Shane's first wife of her jewelry and went and hawked it at the pawn shop together, and then went to a casino. Like, the dad was a degenerate gambler also. It's just very strange. And he's used at some point also to convince Sarma that everything Shane says is true at one point when she's having doubts. So and maybe when you're just hanging on like that and you want to believe stuff, any little bit of encouragement like that you'll take. You just go, okay, well, this guy says it's cool and this dad seems nice, and yeah, so he's not lying to me. I don't know. But she's sending him this money, and he's saying that what's sort of clever about it, on Shane, Anthony's side is that he's not saying if you don't send this money, you're going to be killed. These people are going to come after you. They're going to kill me. I'm going to be killed. Gutted is what he always says. I'm going to be gutted, and you're going to have to deal with it. Yeah. And there's some genius in that because he's not threatening her, right? It's all on him, so she can't later say, well, he told me he was going to kill me or if I didn't send him the money. No. He was just saying that he was going to die, and she loves him so much that, of course, she'll protect him. But she doesn't seem to ever ask, well, hang on, let's take a step back, not talk to Shane about this for a minute. Let me just think this through with my mind. He's continually getting money out of me, and he keeps telling her he's not even using the money. It's being shelved somewhere, and then once they enter the family, it all comes back to her.
Yeah.
Tenfold.
Well, this is also part of the strangeness of Sarma.
The strangeness of Strangus.
The strangeness of Strangus, for sure, and the strangeness of Sarma, who I guess becomes
Strangus.
Sarma Strangus because they get married, which is another bizarre.
Yeah, and you sort of forget it. Like,
because they do.
Yeah, because they seem so unmarried and just so uninterested in each other that, by the time they're on the lam living in motels and casinos, they mention, oh, yeah, well, he's my husband. And oh, right. She married him. Right. Oh, God.
That's right. And that final part where they're finally arrested and they come out and the police officer says to Sarma, do you want to go say goodbye to your husband? She goes, no.
Yeah. She said, do I have to?
No, I don't. I don't want to. But I was going to say, going back to the money, okay, for me to try to make sense of this, say, okay, Sarma on one level is so open-hearted that she, and this is really incredibly generous on my part, she's so open-hearted that she's willing to jeopardize her restaurant, which is her life.
Yeah.
They said she threw herself into this restaurant. And as Jordan said, she is loved by her employees. And she seems to be very good to them. But when she has to wire this money to Shane, it just seems that she said, okay, all right, how much do you need? And then his phone conversations are, if I tell you to wire $50,000 tomorrow, are you going to do it?
Yeah, and she'll say, well, why should I?
I've already given you $1.5 million.
Yeah, and he'll make light of it. Oh, that's nothing.
Yeah.
When we finish this, we're going to have that much a week. Or, just weird things like this, sort of poo-pooing the amounts. That will somehow make it seem like he's got it under control.
Or saying to her, that doesn't matter. It's this wire. It's this time you have to do it.
Right.
Right. Are you going to do it? If I ask you, are you going to do it?
Right.
And she said, no.
Yeah, it's very, I'm going to die if you don't do this. I thought you understood. You said you wanted this.
Yeah, this is that happily ever after.
Right.
You said you wanted the happily ever after. Good boy. With him? But what? You want to be with this guy forever? You're not even with him now.
Right, yeah. He's not even here. It's so weird. So it's just that he was introduced by a celebrity that she trusted. He splashed a lot of cash and looked flashy and seemed mysterious and interesting. Okay, I get it all. And then it breaks down because what else is he showing you? They're not interested in the same things. She likes reading books. He's into movies and video games.
That's the other part of this.
Different food.
That there is wasn't this part of it that the documentarian was saying that there is a theme in his story about the other dimension and the family that's based upon...
It's like Thor.
Yeah.
Right? It's based upon the two brothers battling for control of the world.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting that... And it's so silly. And there's an Indiana Jones thing that he does, like this, it's like the Indiana Jones thing, babe. You got to take that step where just weird things that he's just pulled from movies. I noticed he has a weird tick. I'm not even sure I just caught it, so I thought it was interesting. There's a point when he's messaging her a text early on. He says, "I love you very much so." And I think what he means is, "I love you so very much." But he says, "I love you very much so." If it was just one, I'd say, well, maybe he did mean it that way. But then later he's talking to the employees of Pure and he says, "Don't worry, you'll all be taken well care of." He reverses the words of the phrase he's trying to use. You'll be well taken care of. But no, taken well care of. I love you very much so. Just a weird tick that I noticed. So really what's happening? Let's strip away all the... Actually, I did want to ask you because listeners won't know this, but as I called you at the beginning, I think the professor, you were a political science professor for many years. You're currently professor emeritus.
Correct.
At Arizona State University. But you're also a writer, I would say, primarily. That's really...
I scribble.
Yeah. You've written a book, Stalking White Crows, which deals with a lot of, well, almost entirely the afterlife or an afterlife.
Right. The first third of the book deals with the scientific investigations of life after death. Yeah.
Right.
The book, by the way, listeners, is available wherever mediocre books are sold.
Stalking White Crows. I'll put a link in the show notes. And you've also obviously researched a lot of philosophy and mysticism and even psychics. So even you, though, have trouble seeing how someone could be led to believe, because I was trying to give her the benefit of the doubt somewhere like, okay, maybe she doesn't literally think that Leon and Shane and Sarma are all going to be immortal. She probably knows that that's not real. But maybe she thinks that there is this sort of soulful connection. He's sold her enough on this idea that, because they did say even as a teen, she felt like she was different and special, like she was destined for something. And that can be, I've heard that from a lot of people. That can be something that, in all walks of life, I was going to say some true crime people that go on to be killers, but also, people like Steve Jobs, who said he always felt like he was destined for something great. People like that. This can be this feeling that people have from a very young age that stays with them. And then when someone reinforces that for them and says, no, you are destined for something great, it almost sort of reaffirms everything you've ever thought about yourself. And you really want to believe that. So you're a little more susceptible to going along with it. Like, oh, this is it. This is the thing,
But you don't get with her, or at least I don't see anything with her where he is saying to her how special she is. It's everything about how special he is and how he can bring her along through the family if she will pass these tests. And we don't know that you can pass these tests, Sarma. That's why we're testing you.
Right.
Because we don't know that you're really anything other than what did he call her, the little blonde human?
Tiny blonde human.
The tiny blonde human. So it's nothing special about her. The only special part of it appears to be the dog.
Right.
And Shane. So you think, so where I thought you were headed with asking me about some of my past is that in an earlier part of my life, I studied developmental psychology, and part of that was looking into cults. And cults don't have to involve a big bunch of people. It can really be just a cult figure and one person. And this is what we appear to have with her. She seems to be being lured into a cult. But what I find, there are two things I find about that are interesting. One, it isn't about how special she is. It's how special they are. And can you live up to what we're asking you to do? And that can be a challenge to somebody in a cult. And so you can see that could be a lure. The other part of this, and there wasn't enough of this in the documentary, in fact, there wasn't really any of it at all, is that it doesn't take much to get a person to join a cult. Because once you can get their basic assumptions, everything else follows. It doesn't have to be, although they use techniques of sensory deprivation sometimes and sleep deprivation. Once you have them believing the first thing, the other things seem to follow. And that appears to be the case with her, because there are these gaps that we've just been talking about where he says, send me money. we don't. What's her motivation for doing it, other than to pass these tests and be in the family and be accepted? But I don't know what her motivation really is. You were kind of alluding to it, that she already has a past with crystals and spirituality, and
Yeah.
she's already buying into that. But we don't really know that.
No, we don't know that.
And that would be good to know, because I don't understand what the motivation is, because it certainly isn't in their interpersonal relationship.
No. And it must be a little more than really thinking Leon can live forever. If I do this, if I send all this money, Leon will live forever. Let's just look at that statement for a second. If I continue sending money, Leon will live forever. She can't believe that. So it's all of these factors together that this sounds interesting. I want to be special. I've always thought I was. And if I do these things, maybe I will be too. He certainly seems special. He's doing black ops around the world. He's like Mr. Cool, has all this money and stuff, and he has this family. And so if she believes some of that, maybe the rest is true also. And then I thought the reason I brought up sort of the life after death is maybe she thinks that immortality is in a different dimension, that this family thing can also be the next phase, right? That it's not literally we live immortally here on here on Earth, but we do die, but then we're together, these sort of immortal souls that live on. So it's maybe giving her a little leeway there.
Yeah, well, yes. If it were laid out that way, I would kind of understand it. I mean, you just made more sense of it in 30 seconds than the documentary did at all.
Yeah.
But when you were talking, the first thing I thought of was Heaven's Gate. You remember the Heaven's Gate?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so these people, I don't think they were all illiterate deadbeats.
No.
But they believe that when the comet comes, right, that's the spaceship, and they're going to ascend to the spaceship, and they all believe that, and so they kill themselves.
Yeah.
Well, you think, how do rational people do this? Well, you can look into it and understand the cultish behavior. There isn't enough in the documentary for me to understand what it was that motivates her to believe these things, or even what she believes, because she never really confronts the immortality of the dog, does she? Is she asked that? Did you really think Leon was going to live forever?
She is asked that, and she's not asked directly. At least they don't show it. But she does talk about how she talks about it. She says he was telling me things like Leon could live forever, and we would enter this sort of other universe. But she never says, which of course I knew was bullshit. But she never says any of that. She just says that it's happening. So it is weird.
Yeah, if somebody said to me, there's a house down the street where you can enter, but you have to transform yourself into some other kind of being. Well, your first reaction is, well, let me see it. Yeah. Show me this. This is bullshit. Let me see this. She just seems to be going along. And again, I don't understand the motivation, because this guy is so really unappealing.
Right.
That I wish, could he have been that unappealing? I mean, certainly the people on the periphery, the people in the restaurant thought, who is this guy? He's not a dynamo. He doesn't come in the restaurant and they go, wow,
right,
what a great guy. Boy, I'd love to have him running the show. No, he's creepy. He's strange. He's standoffish. Nobody quite knows what he's doing. He's unimpressive.
Yeah, I think he must do a lot of the groundwork in those early days when they're playing Words with Friends, and he's not there in person yet, because you can sort of be whoever when you're texting, right? And if he's saying the right things and helping her through this difficult time, and she just feels like she has a friend here, and then when he first does meet her, she goes, he's not quite as attractive as I thought, but I'm not going to be judgmental. That's not who I am. And then he is still a little bit charming and seems kind of fun. And they have some intimate love making, and she feels like, oh, I'm in love. And he's got to do that early work that then, this is what these guys do. He's not alone, right? We know that there are these con men. And I wouldn't say that he's a particularly good one. But look what he was able to achieve, so maybe he is.
Yeah, but for example, I didn't see in this documentary what I saw in the Tinder Swindler, where you see how this guy operates with women and really operates on women. I didn't see that in this documentary. And I don't know if that's because they didn't have time to show it, which is too bad, or there wasn't anything there.
Yeah, or they didn't have documents of that.
Yeah, but the other side of this is how Shane manipulates Sarma's mother to send hundreds of thousands of dollars to him.
Yeah, actually, let's go back slightly before that. Let's just talk about how the money begins. I think the first thing they're talking about, he's saying that he wants to buy her out of this debt that she has to Jeffrey Chodorow for the restaurant.
Which, by the way, he says, oh, that's easy.
Right.
We can easily...
$2 million? No problem. Yeah. And they meet with some accountant who may or may not have even been an accountant. It could have just been some dude that Shane knew, which I think it probably was, who says sort of jokingly, well, one easy way to do this would be if you were married. Then Shane could give you the money tax-free and yada, yada, yada. And then 24 hours later, they're married. 24 hours later, this guy makes an offhand comment, and then Shane reinforces it on the drive home, and then it's done. And they go down to the courthouse, and they're married. And that's his first way in, right, is that he's married, and then her money is our money, right? And so that's how he uses it initially, that it's our money now. Oh, I need this. Send me this from our money. It's easier for her to think about it. Well, we're married. We're together.
But the debt's never paid off.
No, that never happens. And they go to buy a house.
The townhouse in New York.
Yeah. They're going to get this house. It falls through somehow. He's never able to put money on the table when it's time.
Yeah. The townhouse is a $12 million townhouse. If I get the numbers wrong, correct me. And he shows some document, and the document is like an email with a figure on it, like 22 million. Oh, I've got 22 million that's available, and then some other documents. But, of course, it falls through. There's no money.
No, there's never any money. One time he produced some diamonds, I think. He took some diamonds out of his coat. So he has access to some of these things, but it's all probably sort of staged. And then it becomes these wire transfers. Again, he's never around. He's out somewhere. And we come to learn that what he's doing is he's receiving these wires of 40,000 here, 60,000 there, and he's gambling it. He's just spending his days at the casino, like all day. He's not a drinker. He's not a drug addict.
Yeah,
he doesn't,
not a partier.
No, none of that. He's just about getting money. And without any real long-term purpose. He doesn't put money away so that, oh, this is my grift and I'm going to be taken care of for life. No, it's just to buy shit and eat and gamble.
Yeah, and live in hotels.
Yeah, that's it. Travel. But not even to see the sights or anything cool. It's just to go to different casinos and
which is another strange
Montenegro.
Part. He'll say to her, "You're flying to Rome. You have to go to Rome. You have to stay there. You're on your own for 7 days. You stay there. It's a test."
Yeah, that was particularly
what? A test of what? Yeah, you're just there on your own. I won't be coming. No, that's not as strange as the third party, the person who's going to meet with Jeffrey Chodorow. He's going to fly to Miami. They're going to have a meeting with this guy, MacArthur or somebody.
Oh, right. Another investor.
Another investor who's going to meet with Jeffrey Chodorow. But it's a complete figment. It's a complete creation. But Sarma is in on the creation, on the sham.
Yeah. Well, that becomes... So, first of all, this is why it's hard to walk the documentary through in any sort of linear sense. Again, you really should go watch it. But yeah, he sends her to Rome at that point because he needs her away so he can go into the business and take all the money out of it, basically.
Yeah, which he does.
Which he does. And then the business falls apart. The restaurant closes. Sarma's friends and employees are contacting her, but she's like, no, don't worry about it. You'll be paid. You'll be paid. And then she's taking out loans to get payroll, and then that falls through. And then Shane's yelling at her for doing that. It's all very bizarre. But he takes all her money. She just gives him all the money, and the restaurant collapses. The employees can't be paid. They leave. They protest. She comes back from Rome, and as you already mentioned, somehow is able to draw upon friends to get money and reopen the restaurant, only for the same thing to happen again not long after.
But the sign of a sign of a different side of Sarma, boy, a lot of S's in that, is that when she reopens the restaurant, all of her employees leave their current jobs and come back to her.
Yeah.
Because they like her so much and they like that restaurant so much. But as Jordan said, then it collapses again. Because of course, how could it not?
Because Shane Fox, Anthony Stranges, is literally draining the funds from, he's just taking all the money, which he now has access to without her just wiring it to him, because he is married to her and they have some sort of, it's unclear, but he's able to just, or maybe she did always have to send it to him. I can't quite remember that, actually. Because I think when they're then tried later on, that's a big thing, is that she takes all the money and gives it to him, and that's a big part of her culpability.
Defrauded her employees.
Yeah. So I guess she does always give it to him, which is interesting because then he's not really guilty of anything, right?
Right.
I mean, he is of some other things, but it's clever. Right, as long as she's always sending it to him and he's her husband and he's asking for it and spending at the casino, he's not hiding anything. That's what I'm doing. It's tricky, it's crafty, but it just makes you go, how did she fall for this for so long? And at one point she says, obviously, I started thinking that maybe I was being conned, because I'm sending all this money all the time and there's never any end result. Okay, when do we get to the house? When do we go see the family? How many times do I send the wires before the test is passed? That's not the point. That's not the point, Sarma. Focus on the next wire transfer. And so she's thinking, okay, this could be bad. But she says, to admit that that's what was happening, that I was being conned, is to accept that it's all gone, that I everything I gave up is gone. I was taken advantage of, I'm humiliated, and so if I just keep believing in it, and he is right, that'll be good, right? She says that, and he says, "Why didn't you call and ask your family for help?" And she said, "And what would I say? And what would they do?" She would say, "Oh, he's taking all my money. How's he doing that?" Well, he asks for it. He says, she knows it sounds crazy.
Right, but it's not only that she, at that point, is estranged from her family, maybe out of shame or just an inability to say, what am I going to say?
And by design.
He's contacting her mother and getting money from her.
Right.
Okay. That's completely bizarre.
And she won't, it doesn't tell Sarma.
It doesn't tell Sarma.
Whereas the father, he tries to contact the father to do the same thing, essentially, meet with me privately. And the father and the sister both say, I don't feel comfortable meeting with you without Sarma.
Right, and he won't do it with Sarma there.
Right.
Okay, now the other part of this is that they go on the lam, right?
Yes.
Which consists of Shane saying something to her like, we're taking a trip.
Yeah, because so this is after the restaurant has collapsed the second time. That's done now. And everyone hates Sarma, basically. And Shane just says, kind of like when he sent her to Rome, oh, let's go. We're just going to leave. We need to get out of here. And then pretty soon we're going to be able to join the family, And of course they go to Vegas. That's where they go.
Where they live in a hotel in separate rooms.
Separate rooms, sort of a suite kind of thing.
Where I guess Shane is filming this in part because you have Sarma in these various hotels around the country, in Vegas and other places, crying, and he's
Depressed, can't get out of
can't get
bed.
up. He's yelling, "You've got to get up." I don't know why she has to get up. He said, "No, you have to get up." What to do? What
I
I
think
don't
to
know.
go to the bank. He needs her to get the money.
That's never. But it wasn't clear to me watching it. That's what it was.
He
Maybe
says it at one point. Sarma, you've got to get up. We got to go to the bank. It's that kind of. At one point, he does.
But yeah, she's crying and she's screaming. But then she says in the interview, "Well, I wasn't held against my will. He
Right.
didn't lock the door. He didn't lock me in." And she's wandering the streets of Vegas while he's in the casino.
Yeah, and she mentions that well, I was going to say that he's good at gambling. That can't be the case because he never has money. But he had this ability to go to the high stakes slot machines and somehow hit a jackpot like 4 or 5 times, like 6,000, 10,000, winning all this money. And so that sort of comforted her somehow, seeing that, like, oh, well, he's good at this, so we'll be okay. I guess he's going to do that. But it's this sort of Stockholm syndrome kind of thing. They do make a comparison to Patty Hearst at one point,
Right.
but this is by design with grifters and these not even necessarily con artists, but guys that are abusers in just romantic relationships that abuse their partners. They cut them off from their friends, cut them off from their family. They're the only person in the life. They are controlling this person. And it makes it harder to leave them because of that, because you're all they have, right? So Sarma is sort of like that. Everyone from the restaurant wants nothing to do with me because I've screwed all of them. They think I'm awful. My family doesn't know what the deal is with me. Little does she know, Mom's still funding Anthony at this point. Anthony's all I've got, and Leon. That's it. It's us.
And she's miserable.
Yeah, I'm absolutely miserable. Hopefully this is going to pan out. We're going to get to the family's house, and all of this money will be repaid. She's clinging to that, but obviously knows it's not true, and is depressed but doesn't know what to do. And then he convinces her to one last time. We got to do one more wire, get $60,000 from this person in New York, where he's trying to keep her away from New York. The journalist from Vanity Fair says that at this point, he just thinks that Anthony didn't know what to do. He said, well, I've obviously gotten all of her money. She doesn't have any money anymore. I'm kind of squeezing the mom now, but she's running out. I don't know what to do. Like, he just sort of doesn't have a plan. I guess I'll gamble. And this is like what I talked about, that he had no sort of end game.
Right.
He didn't put money away or anything. It was just, so now he's drained this woman. He knows he can't follow through on any of these absurd promises he made because they're not real. And so he doesn't know what to do, really. He just tries to get whatever money he still can. They end up in Tennessee in this weird place.
What is that place?
I don't know. I didn't know it existed. It's not Valley Forge. It's something Forge, Tennessee. Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. It looks like maybe a mini Vegas kind of thing.
Yeah, it's got those strange attractions.
Yeah. And there must have been a casino there. That must have been the draw.
Yeah, I'm sure there was.
And they're living in a dumpy motel there. She is living this sad life where he's playing Call of Duty in his room and ordering pizzas. And she's going to Chipotle to hang out with this dude that works there.
That's another part of this that runs counter to the cult element, which is that she is confessing to this guy who works at Chipotle. What is their relationship? What does this guy think of her? Here's this young, attractive blonde woman who comes and hangs out with the night manager at Chipotle to talk about what?
Yeah. He claims that she said, look, I'm with this guy. He's bad news. So don't contact me. I'll contact you, and I'll come over here and we'll drink our beers.
But she never said to him, look, call this number, my father or my sister.
No.
Call this person, or, give me some money to rent a car to get the hell out of here. She's with a guy that she admits is bad news. She knows that her business has been destroyed twice by this guy. Bank account completely drained. No money, no resources.
But she's married to him still. I keep forgetting that and going, and she's probably just thinking, what the hell am I going to do? This is my husband. It's so odd.
Well, maybe that's more of the angle that it's an abusive relationship.
Sure.
At least with Patty Hearst, she became convinced that the Symbionese Liberation Army had the correct political ideology, that her family was part of the problem, not the solution to the ills of the country. She bought into that.
Yeah.
There's nothing here except the family and the meat suit and the other dimensions and immortality and endless riches, none of which has happened. But she seems to have seen through it by this point.
Yeah. Yeah. But she just doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, so it's an abusive relationship. I guess that's the only way you can describe it.
Yeah, and it, of course, doesn't take long to unravel, right? The investors, presumably the investors from the second time around, whoever gave her that $860,000 to restart the restaurant after it first collapsed, now want their money or want some return, and so they press charges. A warrant is put out. Eventually, Strangus uses his own credit card at this Domino's to order pizza and wings for himself, not for Sarma. And that's how the authorities find him. They come to the hotel. They arrest the pair. They go to jail. Anthony can't get anyone to bail him out at this point because, well, he doesn't really have anyone except Sarma, and she's not going to do it. Sarma, of course, gets bailed out for her family. They reconcile. Then she finds out that her mom had been paying all this money. That's impressive, too, that he somehow was able to keep the mother from ever contacting Sarma or saying to her, like, well, I sent all this money. What's the deal? It's wild. So he's got something.
Yeah, he's got something. I still don't know by the end of it what exactly it is. Although, two elements I recall from the end of the documentary. One is that there's a taped conversation between Sarma and Anthony / Shane, where at one point he says something like, well, I still love you and I'm glad to hear I can still make you laugh. But they have almost an amicable exchange instead of her going off on him saying, what a criminal you are, what a wretched, awful person. That's one part where I'm thinking, boy, she just seems weak and pathetic. But to her credit, tell me if this is accurate, she has attempted to and maybe even paid off her employees.
Yes.
I don't know what kind of work she's doing, but whatever it is, she has really tried to seek restitution for what she did to them.
Yeah, that's key. And they're all still good with her. So she's...
Except Chowdhury.
Except Chowdhury, who said, yeah, I don't... she asked him to speak for her or be a character witness, I guess. Witness, and he wouldn't do it.
See, what am I going to say?
Yeah, can't do it. But generally, she's sort of repaired her image. I think most people knew that she was being taken and that they were surprised that it happened to her, but I don't think most held her to blame. But that's something we're going to have to talk about here. So Strangus ends up serving his time simply because he can't get bailed out. So he ends up just being in Rikers for like a year. And then by the time he goes through trial, it turns out his sentence is less than what he already served waiting to be bailed out. So he's pretty much done. Sarma is bailed out, but then after trial has to go back. In the end, the figures are staggering, right? So she personally wired Strangus $2 million all told from her accounts. The mother did another $400,000. Then the money that he took out of the company through Sarma, it basically all totals up to over $6 million. And this is like a 6-year period.
That counts the investors, the $850,000 or $860,000, Chowdhury's money, all that. It's over $6 million.
Yeah. And her, as I mentioned earlier, they actually, I don't think, said what his charges were. She goes down for grand larceny and criminal tax fraud. The $840,000 from the investors, that's really what she's being charged with. For Stranges, as I said, he's not really done anything as far as her wiring the money to him and being the con man. They talk about in the documentary that things are still murky in the legal system about cons and grifting like this and manipulating people. But because of the files he took and some of the money he directly took from the restaurant somehow, that's what gets him.
Yeah, there must have been charges for defrauding her employees because they worked for free.
Yeah.
Because she never paid them.
Yeah, that's what.
But yeah, you're right. What does he do that's actually illegal?
Yeah, because her crimes could have had up to 15 years. I think one of the lawyers says, even if he got the max for some of the things he was charged with, it wouldn't have even been 5 years as a max, which no one ever gets anyway. So, yeah, what was illegal? There's two questions here. Where does the line start for Sarma, for you giving her the benefit and being the victim to being responsible for some of this? Do you look at her? Was she a criminal in this? Was she a bad vegan? Or do you put the blame all on Stranges and give her a pass because she was so manipulated? Where do you stand?
I don't care that she's giving money to strangers until it becomes money that isn't hers. And then seeking investment money from people with no return. At one point, she takes a check to Chowdrow for $100,000 and says, "I'm sorry, it's not more," or this is coming too irregularly. I'm sorry about that. And he talks about how much he appreciates somebody doing that because it never happens in his line of work. What surprises me is that in her life, there is nobody who can come to her and say, "Are you looking at this guy? What's going on here?" It's not her sister. It's not her father. It's not her mother. It's nobody she works with. The only person who could have done that is Alec Baldwin. I mean, he's the only person introduced.
Well, the homeless guy sort of does, or tries to, right? He goes to the house and says to her, "Are you okay?" And
Naz, the bartender / grifter, Russian, who said, there's something happening, you need to record him.
Yeah.
But nobody can sort of sit her down, almost like in an intervention.
Right, and say, "This stuff isn't true,
What are you
Sarma."
doing?
Yeah.
The restaurant, your vegan restaurant that you have loved and that people have loved has been destroyed by you and this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. As you're watching it, you just think, how does this happen to people? And yet we know that it does all of the time.
Yeah.
And there are people out there that prey upon others and make it their. And what's interesting is that in the modern world, a lot of it is online. It starts online because you're not seen. You can be whoever you want to be. You can convince people. That's why so much of it is done through email and texting.
Well, this is a lesson for people. People have got to spend some time introspecting to figure out what are the things that I'm gullible about, where I can be vulnerable. For example, we know that people my age are victims all the time of scam artists on the phone, through email, asking for social security numbers, asking for... People are generally pretty caring, pretty open, and want to be helpful.
Right.
Especially if they're accused of making a mistake. They'd say, "Well, I want to overcome that. Oh, okay, I shouldn't have done that." Well, that's a problem. Let me take care of that. How much money do I need to send you to get this taken care of? Yeah, it happens all the time. And we think that we are somehow invulnerable. I don't know what we think we are, but you need to spend some time looking at yourself, saying, "Oh boy, I could be taken here."
Yeah, and it's a real problem.
You need people around you. I mean, you need people
Yeah.
around you that you love and trust, who can say to you, "There's something off here."
Yeah, and you think the legal system does certainly need to figure out how to be a little bit better with I'm not necessarily saying that strangers deserve more prison time or anything like that, but one of the talking heads in the documentary says there needed to be some sort of, when he got out and had done his time, some sort of tag that goes on him for the rest of his life that says dangerous, don't give him money. Right? If he says things, there needs to be some sort of label or something through financial institutions, or kind of how there's like a sex offender registry, something that
Yeah.
says grifter, con man. If he asks for money, heads up, something, because he could just do it again. He's out.
Well, he will. I mean,
This is what he's done.
Yeah, this is what he does. But as I said, this is happening all the time. That it's not by accident that there is this flood of fraud documentaries.
Yeah.
Where people want to believe things. You said this earlier. People want to believe. They want to believe that their animal will be immortal, or they will be with their loved ones forever. I said, listen, I can tell you that you can investigate that possibility without needing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to somebody.
For instance, reading Stalking White Crows by Jack Crittenden.
Fascinating, but it's fascinating and disturbing, because what is it about Sarma that you see that's so unusual that separates her from the rest of the human species? There's really nothing. She's just, she's a vulnerable, sort of likable person going through her life.
Yeah, he did the same thing to his first wife, which, as you say, started seemingly as a more authentic relationship. They did seem to be a regular couple and didn't get married the next day. They got married quickly, like a year, but they were in a relationship. He was not grifting at the beginning. And then he starts saying, "Oh, I can take advantage here." He starts with his weird stories.
Although we don't really get the story about how they began, how that all happened.
She does say that right away he introduced himself as an ex-Navy SEAL that was wounded, and it was clearly not true. As they say, the father, who was a cop and had his own sort of abusive past.
That's right.
As a degenerate gambler and a drunk, unlike his son.
Who could have schooled Shane on how to walk the line between legal and illegal.
Yeah, I think so. And I would have loved if they could have gotten Stranges or the father on. Was the father real, or was he one of Shane's friends who came in and pretended to be the father, another grifter?
Right.
I think the father was probably real, because the first wife seemed to really know him, who he was specifically, and was like, "Oh no, yeah, the dad and Shane both robbed me." And it's just this family of degenerate gambler grifters. It's so odd. There's a Stranges, of course, declined to be in the documentary, but I would have loved even just a few minutes to hear of his perspective on this. I mean, you get some of him from the recordings of the calls where he seems like a total dick. But there's a part where they take the mug shots when they're apprehended, and they're in the classic black and white jumpsuit. And one of the employees that's a talking head in the documentary says, "He looks like the Hamburglar in his picture." And I just burst out laughing at that part, because he really does. Just look at these mug shots. Maybe I'll use that as the episode artwork. But
now you spend time looking at true crime documentaries.
I do.
How would you grade this one?
Well, it's not your standard murder true crime doc, your killers and your whodunits. So it's kind of nice to focus on something a little different, but still very much a crime. so it's nice to have a different type of true crime story, and one that's maybe something maybe a little more pressing to our lives. Something that most of us are likelier to encounter than murder and serial killers. So, yeah, I think it's one. I think it's a compelling story. Highly recommend watching it. Two, I think it's mostly well done. I probably give it an A for my letter grades, not an A plus, but A. And whether it's if it's going to go up against some of the all-time classic true crime documentaries, I don't know that it's that type. I don't know if I would immediately think of it as a true crime documentary, even though it very much is. It's more just a wacky story about sort of nutty people. But
well, all the way through it, I'm asking the same question with every episode. How is she falling for this? How is this going on?
Yeah.
And I never really got an answer. And I come back to where I was at the beginning of our conversation. I don't know if that's just wrapped up in human behavior and human nature, or if it's the fault of the documentarians for not giving us more detail.
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of both. And I think also it's unfortunate that we don't get to hear their conversations until she starts recording him, which is when things are already pretty bad. So it would be nice to have some examples of some of the kind things he said early on, or what his charm was. Just some examples of his charm, because we do get some texts, but they're pretty basic and like, "I'll love you forever," and "It's you and me, babe. It's just going to be us forever. Do you want this? Believe." Stuff like that, where you're like, okay, but it's not anything that's, so it must have been, when you meet someone and you fall in love, the initial period is very, I'm on cloud nine, and you feel great anyway. And so you're in a spot where you can, I think, be taken advantage of. And he's obviously practiced at it. He knows some things to do. There are probably some key points that he tries to make. And
but there was never a time when I thought she loves this guy, and boy, is she happy in this relationship. Nor did anybody around her ever say anything like that. So do you think she wants this forever? This guy
Right.
and this relationship?
Well, then you wonder if it's just about passing the tests, because she's sort of a competitive person and wants to be special, and then goes, if I pass these tests, I will be too. That might be a motivator. And then there's
that has more pull for me.
Yeah. The Leon piece of it is bizarre, but you wonder too how he was. Strangest, did he talk with authority and look right into her eyes and say, "You need to believe that immortality is possible. I was out fighting wars in North Africa on this Black Ops mission that was all very high-tech and scary, and let me tell you, there was this mystic there that," who knows what kind of things he said, but if you're believing that he's living that kind of life, and he has a way of convincing you of things, and you want to be special, and you're heartbroken, and you're in love with this dog, and it all just kind of comes together. I mean, I don't know. Sad, really.
Yeah, pathetic.
Sad and pathetic. Well, you want to give a letter grade?
Okay, so it kept my attention. I didn't skip episodes. I watched it all. I found it fascinating because I found it baffling. But I have these questions that were not addressed, and I didn't get enough of what I wanted.
Yeah.
So I'd give it a B.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the story is wacky and sort of fun enough as a viewer that it gets the A, but you're right. There are some maddening questions you're left with, and you do want it to be a little deeper, to get deeper. And maybe they just couldn't, but
I wanted them to acknowledge that they couldn't.
Right. Say that.
Yeah. Acknowledge it. Yeah. We couldn't get an interview with Stranges. He wouldn't come on. We couldn't. Sarma was not really forthcoming about the relationship. Nobody around her really understood the relationship, so we couldn't get any information from anybody around it. The only being we could have talked to was the dog.
Right.
And the dog was not forthcoming either.
Right.
So now we're left, but just be upfront about it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because it leaves me disturbed that humans could fall for this. I among them could fall for this kind of thing. But the hope is that you, as I said earlier, you have people around you who could maybe pull you back into reality.
Right.
But maybe not. Maybe you're
That's important. Maybe that's part of it. You know, the fact that she was an introvert. And they said even before he came along, she would go to work and was very happy there. But her nights were spent just going home and cuddling with Leon.
Yeah.
And that was it for a long time. And so she doesn't really have friends outside of work. And yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, there was nobody in the documentary who said, I confronted her about this relationship and she refused to talk to me about it or pulled away. There's nobody who said that.
Yeah, it's true. And so maybe some of her friends let her down a little bit as well. The Tinder Swindler. You think I should watch that one too? Maybe not for Doc World, but just in general. Is it worth watching?
Yeah, yes. I'm interested in fraud.
Yeah.
It's because I mean more than murder and savagery.
Sure.
I'm interested in fraud because it's so prevalent, and I think because we have this sort of rash of documentaries coming out now, it must be something that's on people's minds.
And maybe more likely to happen to us.
Yeah, and it's just amazing to me the how brazen people are in their lies. You know, Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos comes to mind. The Tinder Swindler, there you can see a little more of two factors involved. The being overwhelmed by attention from somebody who appears to be incredibly wealthy and someone who is fully attentive to you and really seems to want to make you happy. That's not what I saw. We saw the first part, right, where Strangeness is presenting himself as somebody who's really rich.
Yeah.
But you didn't see the second part where he's showering her with attention and, you know, they go to the restaurant and he only has eyes for her and he's being so solicitous of her and what can I do? You know, do I stay in the background? There's none of that.
Totally different style.
Yeah. So, it'd be a good contrast.
Okay. Well, I'll take that on board as a recommendation.
I have a public service announcement for your listeners. In 2023, they should be on the lookout for a new true crime series coming from Hulu based on the book Under the Bridge. And an important one to watch out for because one of the contributors, one of the writers, is none other than my son, Todd, Jordan's brother, Todd Crittenden.
That's right. And it's about or based on a true crime, one that I don't know about, but some sort of murder of a person.
Murder of a person.
Took place under a bridge somewhere in the 80s, was it?
No idea. This is one of my responsibilities as a parent, to watch out for my children and where I can broadcast the good news about their contributions, as I do with Dark World.
Well, it's much appreciated, Dad. So we've plugged Todd. We've plugged the book. What else do I have coming up? I've got a few videos coming for the YouTube, a couple of vlogs. Going to get the Ed Man back. He and I will be doing something soon. And I've got several cases, as I mentioned on my last episode, that were sent in to me by this Nate Bartels character that I talked about, who not only sent me a bunch of cases that he claims have not really been covered, but also a plethora of links and information for me. He's put the research on a plate for me, as it were. So that's helpful. And there's some really interesting ones in there. So Dad? Cactus? Cactus Jackson? WJ? Thank you for coming on the
Do
podcast.
I start getting into your nicknames, or do I leave those alone?
Well, that's up to you. We'll save that for another time.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It was enjoyable.
Yeah, I had a good time, enjoyed the doc, and enjoyed the discussion even more. Listeners, be safe, be kind. See ya!